I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, what's happened to the centre-right coalition that ran BC for so many years under various names, SoCreds, BC Liberals? The latest iteration was cobbled together just before the last provincial election when John Rustad, who had been kicked out of the BC Liberals before they became BC United, joined up with the dormant Conservative Party. And then Kevin Falcon, the BC United leader, pulled his party out of the race. Oh, BC politics. And unbelievably, this party with virtually no money, no organization, and a lot of newbie candidates almost won the election. Such was the unhappiness with the NDP government and Premier Eby. Now, one might have thought that such a surprisingly good result would have given this new group hope and enthusiasm. No. Instead, the backstabbing and innuendo began. Whispers, more whispers. John Rustad, the man who had brought them so close to victory, would be gone by Monday, or next week, or next month. 1 year later, 5 MLAs have left or been kicked out of caucus. A majority of the Conservative Party executive have called for Rustad's resignation, as have the presidents of 5 Metro Vancouver ridings. And yet, John Rustad is becoming more and more prominent on social media, talking about issues such as Cowichan, affordability, EV mandates. To help us understand the machinations of politics in this province and Vancouver is my guest this week, Dr. Stewart Prest of UBC. Back in a moment. Stewart Prest is not only a professor of political science, he's a student of it, watching the shenanigans, if I can use that word, going on in British Columbia politics. What is your assessment of what's happening right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we see the NDP clearly in charge and in trying to use their power in a number of ways to push agendas of development in the province and trying to limit certain projects out of province, notably the pipeline across the province. And yet, a lot of the action and the shenanigans seems to be happening in the opposition in this BC Conservative Party, and as a chance to the actors orbiting that party, because not everybody is inside the tent at the moment. And so we seem to be going through one of these periodic cycles that we do see on the right of politics in BC, where the right of centre party explodes or implodes and then reforms. But this has happened in a rapid way from the 2024 election, when BC Conservatives supplanted Kevin Falcon's BC United, and it seems like that wasn't fully settled. And so we're already into another cycle of implosion, explosion, and it hasn't resolved itself yet.
It must be surprising to some people to see a party that did so well, almost won the election, came from nowhere, and then they start eating their own.
Yeah, and I think those two things are connected in a way where that right of the center faction or movement, if you like, has multiple factions within it, and they agree on a few things. They tend to see eye to eye on things like fiscal conservatism, trying to have responsibility around budgets, but on a number of other issues, they are divided. We have a more populist wing, a more social conservative wing, and then a more middle-of-the-road version of conservatism that is again, fiscally conservative, but more progressive on a number of other issues, and tends to see, in some ways, more eye-to-eye with folks on the progressive side of the aisle. And on some of the very deeply divisive issues of our time, like what to do about the United States, we actually see a real fault line in the politics of the right. And so there are all these tensions. And when there is the promise of imminent power, I think those groups can find ways to work together. But as soon as that disappears, so the missed opportunity of the election, then we see the fighting turn inward as control, a struggle resumes for control of whatever the party of the right is at that moment.
Isn't it true that in a province like British Columbia, we're a very strong left movement. The center and right will never win an election unless they're together.
Effectively, if you look at the broader sweep of BC politics, there's a fascinating stability there. You're right, where if you like, the social democratic vote has been pretty stable going back more than half a century. We see it consistently hitting 30-some% into the 60s. It bumps up towards 40% in the 1970s under Dave Barrett, and it goes up and down a little bit, but it tends to be pretty stable. And then on the right, we tend to have a much wider fluctuations, where when everybody who is non-NDP is together in the BC Liberals or the Social Credit Party before them, they're able to consistently win elections. But as soon as that coalition breaks apart, and again, some of the issues that divide are pretty significant, the NDP has a much easier time of it.
There's no question there has been, a movement against Rustad from within his party. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's, again, a couple of different reasons depending where within that movement you stand. I think Mr. Rustad has been pretty good at saying what he believes as a conservative, and trying to create a space for others who are like-minded within that party. That seems to be the thing that brought him to preeminence within the BC Conservatives as the leader of that party, up against Kevin Falcon and BC United. And really, we saw momentum swing his way. It really helps that the party is called Conservative as well, and so he was, in some sense, I think, at the head of a parade that was already moving, and that really helped him out as well last year. But I think there are some real criticisms of his ability to grow in the position and to continue to keep all sides happy within this really fractious coalition. And we can see effectively he's having to look over both shoulders, because we have folks who are on the more progressive side of the divide who favor policies of inclusivity, folks like Eleanor Sturko, who clearly are not feeling welcome in the party and indeed have been pushed aside. But on the other side, we have others who are much more skeptical about aspects of modernity, who are willing to openly question the realities of the traumas of residential schools, for instance, like Dallas Brody, who are also breaking aside. And so it seems like everybody is dissatisfied with his leadership on either side of this divide. And if you're pleasing no one, it's really hard to hold on to that position.
Yeah, and you sort of wonder if anyone could pull that diverse coalition together, because the positions you've just described are like very far apart.
Absolutely. They are in many ways more divided than they are united. If one wing of your movement thinks the United States is a threat and is very much about elbows up and trying to insulate ourselves against the influence of the United States, and another wing of your movement ultimately believes that Donald Trump has some really good points, that in many ways Canada has to align itself with this new reality, it's very hard to reconcile those two positions. And I don't know that Mr. Rustad has found a way to do that. I think the only way that we see these movements, even in less divided times, come together is when there's a sense that they're going to win. That there is a sense that power is imminent or power is held, and then everyone can find a place, and essentially the leader has the kind of political capital to create some allowances, but also draw some hard boundaries that everyone respects. But clearly, when Mr. Rustad's trying to draw boundaries here, and he's tried to draw a few, there's a much more pushback than acceptance.
I'm sure your position's a bit like mine, where we're observers and trying to analyze, but people whisper in your ears. And the number of people I have, many I don't know, will come up to me at a gathering and say, oh, Rustad's gone, or he'll be gone. And so how does this play out, do you think? He's still there.
It's a good question, because his position looks untenable. When you have lost this much support, and now it's not just these wings of the movement, but essentially some of the core actors of the actual party. When we hear the members of the board saying we need a leader to step aside because we have chaos. We simply cannot organize this party to compete with this so much churn. And so we are also hearing heads of riding associations say similar things. The folks who are on the ground looking to compete in the next election are saying we need to turn the page on this leadership, and Mr. Rustad simply is refusing to go. And so There, a couple of different things can happen. One is that he will continue in this sort of hunker down mode where he'll probably bleed some more support, where a few more people will simply throw up their hands and say, this is no longer a competitive vehicle, and we'll see the party start to decline into something he can maintain control of, but it'll be less than that big tent coalition. Or effectively, action has to come from caucus at this moment, where a majority of caucus have to stand up and say, we will not follow you anymore. Not just in a letter from outside the caucus, but the actual elected members have to say, you cannot lead us anymore. We need to have new leadership. And effectively, if those immediate members of the parliamentary party refuse to be followed, he will have very little choice but to resign or essentially lead a party of one.
I would suggest the only people smiling these days are the NDP and Premier Eby as he watches. You use the word chaos, right?
Yeah.
If he steps aside, do you think there's an obvious leader to step in?
I think we will see a very heated contest coming from these different wings of the broader conservative movement, and I think the membership will be obviously looking into things like electability, somebody who can really pull the party back together to bring these different factions together. But different members of the movements are going to be looking for somebody who has their interests at heart, and those may not be the same thing. So I would expect a very competitive race, because for all the chaos we're describing, they are still neck and neck in the polls with the NDP. The NDP is long in the tooth. We know voters get restive after a couple of elections under the same government.
That's an amazing thing that the polls are still close. We're going to talk about this idea of a big tent, including all these different opinions and whether it works or not, right after this message. We were trying to guess what might happen if things start to fall apart even more with the Conservative Party in BC. But what about not just individuals? What about parties? Do you think the BC Liberals will ever come back?
BC Liberals will always be with us, whatever we call them. These different factions are there. And so we see attempts, Karen Kirkpatrick trying to resurrect essentially a centrist party, Centre BC. So that sensibility is there, but it's a question of how these intramural politics play out within the right, whether it starts to gain additional support. The pattern we have seen, and it's never a prediction of the future, but it can give us some indication, is that we see a right-of-center party govern for a while, and one or other sides of that divide tends to have the majority say. So the BC Liberals tended to be a more institutionalist, more center, middle of the road party, but they clearly were willing to bring in more populist thinking voters during the 2000s, and they were able to maintain that coalition as long as they maintained power around a sort of free enterprise coalition, that somewhat empty but really important tagline for the right. And but as soon as that fell apart, we saw a kind of spiral in the BC Liberals, and they in turn had replaced social credit, which had tended to be more populist, but again brought in more institutionally minded, more business type people over time. So one might expect that cycle to happen again, but our politics are more divisive now. They're more fragmented, so there's no guarantee that a new stable coalition will emerge. And honestly, and this I don't hear anyone talking about, so I don't know that it would ever happen, but if you bang your head against the wall enough times and the same bad result happens, I do wonder if at some point people on the right start playing with the idea of electoral reform again, right? Where if you really can't build a stable party, do you think about ways that you can have more than one party exist on the right? And so that's another alternative.
That's an interesting thought.
It is. It's essentially, since the unification of the right under Stephen Harper at the federal level, we've really heard those conversations muted. But prior to that moment, we did hear versions of that conversation ongoing, and so it could be picked up again. I think there's a strong belief on the right that they need to unite to win, and so that is part of the DNA effectively at the moment. But if you lose enough times by falling apart at the last moment, you may think about ways where you don't actually have to stick together quite so hard.
Well, one thing that supports the idea of we must all come together and work is the big tent idea. And there are very few politicians that haven't used that expression. We're a big tent party. You can come in with different views, and we've got space for this and that. But the fact is, they don't have space, because you look at the BC Liberals. They kick out John Rustad because he passed on an email or social piece that they didn't like. And so he was out of the party. Yeah. And then Rustad comes in, and he's head of the Conservatives, and all of a sudden he kicks out Eleanor Sturckow because her views didn't fit with some people. Look at the city of Vancouver. Ken Sim is in there, and at first he's just got this solid majority. And then all of a sudden he kicks out Rebecca Bly. What's going on there?
Yeah, I do think there's a tendency for leaders who feel under pressure to grasp more tightly and to, rather than say, well, you can't talk about these things. This is not core to our identity, but we're still going to find ways to work together. It's more of a my way or the highway sort of approach. And I think that is an increasing form of politics, particularly on the right, but we do see it everywhere, I think, to really demand the adherence to a certain vision of politics within a party, and that makes it harder to maintain a big tent in an era when we do have such divisive issues, and so I do think we're seeing that at the city level, where ABC is in many ways it came to power with this very simple promise that we're going to try to clean up the streets of Vancouver. We're going to pay for additional policing and additional support for mental health. It was sort of a both-and approach. But with the expulsion of Rebecca Bly and the way in which the budget is coming together for 2026, what we see is a kind of much smaller version of ABC saying, really, we're going to pay for policing, but nothing else. And so that big tent has become a smaller tent rather than saying we're going to do all that we need to meet the different needs of Vancouverites. We're really going to focus on maintaining this core idea that we can effectively control. And I don't think it's going to work with voters in the long run.
Well, and think of the swings that Vancouver voters have been through. Huge percent increase in property tax, 1, 2, 3 years. And all of a sudden, because we're in an election year, 0%? Like, how does that work?
It suggests that this is an election stunt, effectively, but it's a stunt that can be very costly, because when you are absolutely holding the line on budget and cutting or gutting at least entire departments, that's all kinds of institutional memory that will be lost. And one of the necessary parts of a solution to the wicked problems Vancouver faces is additional housing. So if you're cutting all funding for additional social housing in order to continue to meet the required increases for policing, you're essentially only paying for one tool when you need a whole toolbox, and so you'll just have more problems to deal with, which will require more funding for enforcement, for emergency services, and so it is I think an electoral budget, but it is a very short-sighted one.
And how will it play?
I think the fact that it is so late in the day, as you mentioned, there were multiple large increases in property taxes, and then to see it drop to zero right now, just in time for an election, without any kind of larger theory to explain how they managed the budget effectively. They just said, we're just going to change the budget. I do think there's going to be some cynicism, even among voters who are looking for limited tax increases, and for anybody who is worried about service provision in the city beyond the narrow lens of law enforcement, they're going to be really worried about the future, whether they're looking at environmental issues, sustainability issues, housing issues, provision of services to the community. We have very little information about any of those things in the current budget, and so anybody who relies on the city for anything, which is just about everyone, is going to have questions about the things that they rely on.
And we're talking about the divisions and everything fracturing. I don't even know if we've got a Parks Board. I mean, do we have a Parks Board or not? And of the ABC members there, a couple are still ABC, a couple aren't.
Yep.
We've now got Rebecca's going to start a new party. There are talks about others who might start parties. We're going to have so many parties.
It's going to be a yet another wild electoral cycle in Vancouver, but we're by now, I think, used to that. They're all pretty wild, and I think we're going to see some very vigorous competition in, if you like, the not ABC side of the ledger, and that's very wide potentially. And we'll see members of the more established progressive parties, one city, and perhaps the Greens will put forward a candidate, but then we have a couple of centrist candidates trying to create new parties on the fly, and we have seen that work with ABC, but just because it worked once doesn't mean it's going to work again. And so Kareem Mallam and Rebecca Bly, they may have trouble gaining traction, and so we'll see almost like I think a primary process, to borrow an American analogy, where voters will start to settle on who they think is a viable candidate, and the polling early in 2026 will be really important to tell what the actual choices come election day later on.
I don't know if you think this, but I've often felt that elections are very often against someone rather than for. I think that's what Trudeau was facing. Anybody like Poilievre or whomever, it was against Trudeau. And I do think in this last provincial election, this was against the NDP and Eby. It wasn't that all of a sudden these new guys were magnificent.
That's right. I think the campaign in 2024 provincially was remarkably thin, considering the issues at stake. It was a kind of competition over some middle class tax relief, different versions of the same general idea. And I was a little surprised that neither the NDP nor the Conservatives tried to put together a larger vision that they really sold to voters during the election. And I think you're right. The fact that there is consistent support for some option on the right is really voters frustrated or tired of the current government wanting to turn the page. There is an inevitability to these cyclical phenomena in BC, but
and that must explain the polling still being so close. I can't think of any other reason.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Stewart. I wish you well with your students and the new programs you're starting. I look forward to seeing you again.
My pleasure, anytime.
Thank you. We'll be back in a sec. More than ever, with minority governments in Ottawa and British Columbia, and Vancouver municipal government in the throes of changing party affiliations, it is important to remember, despite all of our frustration, that every vote counts. We earn the right to criticize and complain only when we have participated in the messy process of democracy. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.